We forget capacity is a really big part of the equation when it comes to our decision making. It's something that I say all the time. It's like, for example, when people struggle with like, my family doesn't really care about me or this person doesn't really care about me. It's like, wait a second. Have you evaluated how much capacity they have to care? Because when you've gotten no sleep, when you have really struggled and you're under pressure, how much capacity do you have? So I appreciate that. I think it's important.
Great points. Great points you're bringing up. Let us talk about attachments a little bit here. What do you think someone's attachment style will tell about their needs?
Yeah, whoa, really important. Okay, so what someone's attachment style tells us about their needs is, I kind of think about a coin. My brain just did like, what's the opposite of that? The attachment style is the byproduct of the needs that are unmet and that were likely consistently unmet. So for example, let's just kind of isolate. You have the 4 mega attachment styles, if you will. And if we break it down, there's one of the 4 is secure attachment, right? Secure attachment, let's think about the needs that were unmet in a secure attachment. There's not really many. Hence why we're going to put that over to the side on the sideline. Now let's look at the 3 insecure attachment styles. Let's look, for example, at the avoidant attachment style. The avoidant attachment style is an attachment style that essentially says, when I was growing up, during those primal periods of development, the needs that were not met for me were things like reliability and consistency in accordance with the love that I needed, the closeness that I needed, the attachment, the safe touch that I needed. Thereby, I'm going to develop these protectors in order to make sure that I don't go near that fear, that pain, that uncertainty, or that risk of getting hurt again because someone didn't have the capacity or didn't care enough or didn't love me enough, whatever the narrative is or the reality is. I would encourage us to look at both of those to be able to meet my needs. So for example, I pull up avoidant attachment style because that was my primary attachment style. I'm recovering avoidant over here, working on my secure attachment. For me, when I realized that growing up, and I actually had a recent conversation, Shada, about this with my mother. So it was so fascinating because I asked her, I said, and the reason why is because I hit my 31st birthday a couple days ago. And I thank you. I cashed in on that all the time out of curiosity. So I'm like, hey, Mom, what was it like for, and then I go into asking her all these questions about the development. But I was curious about the avoidant attachment style and how that developed and what specific parenting, if you will, had been done. So I grew up in a household where I was the second child that was born out of 3. So it wasn't my mother's first. And I had a father who worked. He was an entrepreneur. But I had experienced that avoidant attachment style. And I had asked my mother, I said, what kind of research had you done at the time? So she had me in 1994. And she said, there wasn't a lot of research that was available. I think I read like a book or 2, Reader's Digest. And I was kind of giggling because I can't imagine having a child with just reading one book because there's so much research now that's publicly available. But when I was recalling kind of the history, I recognized, and my sister was in the room, who just so happens to be a couple of years younger than I. She was in the room and we were having this conversation about, at the time, parents didn't know that it was going to neurologically impact a child if they were to leave them in their crib and let them cry it out. So the cry it out Ferber method actually really impacted a lot of individuals when it comes to the needs. Baby cries, in this case it was me, and I'll use just me as an example. Baby cries. I was crying for whatever reason. And because of the conditioning of let her cry it out was the parenting instructive device, the instruction back then, that's what happened. So the needs there that didn't get met, I don't know, because I wasn't conscious at the time, but I'm sure it was hunger, like closeness and comfort, self-soothing and regulation, because as a child and as an infant, you can't regulate yourself. You need co-regulation for that. So those needs that weren't met, therein lied showcased all of the unmet needs, hence why my protectors developed the way in which they did, which was the avoidant attachment style. Same thing can be applied to the insecure and not just the insecure, but all of the insecure attachment styles: anxious avoidant, anxious, disorganized now, right? So
Dismissive,
long
yeah.
and short. Long and short, it's the unmet needs that are there that do bring the equal opposite of that attachment style, because that is how our brain is wired. That is how our psychology is wired. Like, that is how we are, quote unquote, wired. And in all reality, shit, I think it's actually quite impressive that we all get to this point where we have these attachment styles. And then we are now having a global conversation more and more about needs. And needs are the primary conversations that I'm at least hearing with other people, right? That's starting to come into the fold as pop culture kind of popularizes some of these new findings, if you will.
So, how one can recognize and discover their own attachment style when they are in a relationship, and even when we change partners and we break up with someone and we enter a new relationship, and we play by the old tape.
Yeah.
We're not even conscious about that. And we don't even recognize our own attachment styles. And we keep repeating the same thing over and over, and we wonder why these things keep happening.
100%.
How can we be conscious and change that?
So I'm glad we talked, and thank you for giving me the space to really talk about that growth math earlier, because the unconsciousness that is happening, the 60 to 9,000 thoughts per day. Now we're talking about what are the contents of those thoughts. And when it comes to attachment, right, the patterns, how can we understand our attachment styles, and how can we maybe start to change? The change process is very similar. It's understanding what are those thoughts? What are the triggers of those thoughts? Because we are creatures of habit, we are creatures of pattern. So when you interact with individuals, especially in an intimate setting, we also need to go through the recognition that not only are we hitting on, our some of our most basic needs, but our most primitive needs. Human beings are predisposed to belong, and I'm not saying to belong with one person, but I'm saying to attach and to have a sense of attachment that allows our authenticity to be widely and safely available. So when we're in an intimate relationship and we're experiencing these patterns happen, and they're happening unconsciously, and we're recognizing, oh, okay, so I hear this interview. Shada's asking some questions, and maybe I'm going to jot down some notes, because I recognize that my attachment style is maybe driving the bus of how I select partners, right? Of how I think that something means love, when in reality, what it actually looks like and feels like and is on the day to day is this person is fitting that exact mold of my caregiver of not meeting my needs consistently. And my scripting, my patterning is saying that this is a good thing because this is normal, this is familiar, and this is good. When in reality, that's prioritizing the short term safety, and I'm putting air quotes, for the long-term success. And that's what I call the safety success loop. The safety success loop allows you to recognize those thought patterns in specifically intimate relationships that are predisposing you to prioritize your short-term comfort at the expense of your long-term. And so it really is tracking the patterns of what thoughts you're having, and therefore the physiological sensations. And then I also think it's really important to recognize the outcomes too. What are these thoughts activating in terms of behaviors, right? Because our thoughts activate the emotions activate our behaviors are what we do on the day to day and how we interact with our intimate partners. And when we can track our patterns and we recognize, like, oh, it's this thought that's charging this emotion, that's charging this physiological response that is having me act in this way, I recognize that the outcome is I'm actually maybe getting a little bit too clingy for any partner to actually have a safe, secure attachment style with me, because maybe I am over, quote unquote, needing of reassurance. Now, here's the thing. We had group coaching 2 or 3 weeks ago, and one of our members said this, and I want to echo this from the rooftops and give credit where credit's due. She shared a quote in the chat with us, and she said, "You are as needy as your unmet needs." And I think that that is so freaking powerful, because our attachment styles, when we find whatever we might be predisposed to, be it anxious, be it dismissive, be it avoidant, disorganized, like whichever one we, quote unquote, find our patterns fitting into, We oftentimes have the shame that comes up right next to that, our self exploration, recognizing our patterns. And the shame comes from us having some degree of a narrative and of a script that our needs don't matter. Our needs aren't worthy of being fulfilled. And in all reality, whatever neediness we might feel or the pattern that we're doing is just a byproduct of someone not having capacity to help meet our needs or help us develop capacity to master and meet our own needs. And so the shame doesn't need to be there, but it is there. And to recognize how shame goes right hand in hand with those thoughts and how it activates those behaviors is, from my perspective, incredibly important to be able to start to change that.
This is right on point. So clear.
Mm,
You make
good.
everything so clear. Thank you, Emilia. What
Thank you.
how do you differentiate between the trauma bond and a soulmate connection?
Ooh, good question. So good. Okay, how do I articulate this? Because I've never gotten asked this specific question in this specific way. So bear with me as I verbal
For
process in real
sure.
time. So the trauma bond, my brain is kind of breaking it down in a biochemical level. So a trauma bond is far more. I'll explain it through this. I have a client who is trauma bonded with one of her partners, and recently we understood after kind of breaking down her limiting beliefs specifically about love. So this is super on point. And I asked her, she's more of the anxious attachment style, just for context. And whenever she kind of goes into relationships, she recognizes the patterns very similar, right? We're literally going through this work right now with her in real time. And she's recognizing this. And I ask her, I says, okay, so what are your beliefs about like love just in general? And she's looking at me. She's like, Emilia, love is chaos. Love is drama. Love is exciting. Love is the highs and the lows. Love is always, there's always something that's going to come down the line. And so if we invert that psychology, for her, love is not a sense of stability and security. And she said, love is not calm. She used the word boring. I thought that was wonderful. And it's not consistent. You don't have to fight for it. And I'm like, whoa, those are some really big limiting beliefs. And I think that that's a great way to articulate what is the difference between that quote unquote true love and what is that trauma bonding quote unquote love. Because both of them, if you just peel back the layers of neurochemistry, both of them are very similar, except for the true love, the one that is over here, if you will, on the right hand side, the true conscious love, that is not with the biochemical highs and lows of adrenaline, cortisol. There's the anandamide, there's the serotonin, there's the oxytocin, there's the endorphins, all of that's there. But the adrenal revving of one's central nervous system is a great recognition of trauma bonding because you're always feeling that level of stress. And that stress is the trauma bonding in real time where there is a loss if something doesn't go right, if the text doesn't come through, it and while in true love or conscious love, that might be there, but it's the intensity, the magnitude, and the frequency to which it is there. So how much are you feeling stressed out when maybe your partner doesn't text you back? It's a little bit different in that. So the trauma bonding, I really look at that from a neurochemical standpoint of how revved, and for anyone that's listening to this and might be thinking, am I trauma bonded or am I in a conscious relationship? There's a sense of safety, security, sereneness almost to that level of conscious love. Whereas in trauma bonding, it feels like it, but you have to convince yourself of it. And that convincing is a great override of the cognitive process to the stress that's actually happening inside in the soma. And I've been there, so I know I'm not knocking anyone that's been
Oh,
trauma bonded.
we all have been there.
Who hasn't is a real question. I think that trauma bonding can actually teach us a lot about ourselves too. I'm not for it per se. I'm not saying go get trauma bonded with someone, but in I think and what I've personally experienced and what I've also witnessed with others, and we could pull up the data on this too. If you are curious, you can learn a lot about yourself through whatever trauma bond you have had, because that shows you where those unmet needs are, where that biochemical reaction is happening, where you might be predisposed to sync yourself up to the IV of stress. And I think it can be, if you're a curious individual, can really help you evolve in those leaps and bounds if you have vulnerability, courage, and humility at the forefront, and the willingness to not subject yourself always to that level of maybe treatment or whatnot, what you might be trauma bonded in. So,
Trauma bonding usually happens unconsciously anyway. You're
yeah,
not consciously going to trauma bond with somebody.
no, that's the insidious part of it too, because I think, Shida, to that point, it's really valid. We think that we have a choice within that. And more often than not, it's an unconscious predisposition to seek out what's familiar. And that's not free will. That's not choice, at least from my perspective. So thank you for saying that.
Do we have time for another question?
We do have one. Yep. Time for one more question.
Let
Yeah.
me ask you this. This was on my mind. How
Yeah.
can you support somebody and their inner child and have compassion towards their inner child wounds while they are healing when
Mm.
you are in a relationship without becoming their parent?
Ooh, that's so critical. What I've found to be successful, not only in my personal practice, but also as I connect with other individuals in that space, doing that quote unquote work. It takes a very conscious person to be in that seat, to not go into that mm, part that wants to avoid or help prevent the pain of a client or someone who's going through that, even if it's a friend, right? Because we all have this compassionate part of ourselves, and that's where, I don't want to say part, but it's true self. There's true self emits that compassion, and we can all tap into that. I love the quote that the highest form of intelligence is empathy, and I think that that's what's so unique to our being species, is that we are so great at empathy, some more than others for sure. And when we can apply the empathy to someone who is in their healing journey, or who is struggling and they're navigating their inner child journey, or they might be going through that reparenting, to be able to know where that line of empathy, sympathy, and compassion are. Right? A lot of people don't know the difference between sympathy, empathy, and compassion. And the best visual that I could give anyone that's kind of in this journey, which I think is helpful, and I try to keep myself in check as well, is sympathy. So picture you're standing on a rock looking down at a pool, kind of like something that you would like jump into, or it could be a diving board or whatever. And you have a friend that's in the pool. That represents the person who's going through that inner child healing journey, right? And you're the friend in this analogy, where you're sitting up above the pool and you're looking down, and the visual is they're telling you all their problems, right? While they're swimming in their pool, and their pool represents their misery, their suffering. And you're standing up on the diving board or the rock above looking down. Sympathy is kind of, oh, I hear what you're saying, but I'm not tapping into my own personal experiences, right? You're not extending what's called empathy, which is empathy is when you're literally in the pool with them, swimming there. I've been there. I see your pain. I feel your pain. And then compassion is sitting on the side of the pool, not above, not in it, not swimming. Compassion is where I find that being that person is the best place to be. And we dip in and out of empathy and compassion. Sympathy is something that I think is really difficult to hold space for in someone who has that inner child, because someone who's going through that and is seeking your support needs to know that you, to some degree, either have been through what they've been through, because that establishes a level of safety and security within their unconscious, or that you have the capacity to extend loving humility and compassion to where where what you have been through doesn't compare or doesn't match what they've been through. And then you can still extend compassion from there. And compassion is sitting on the side and saying, if you want to get out of this pool of empathy, whenever you do, I'm here to help you along the way. And that compassionate component is the line where you don't get in the pool and swim around in their suffering with them. You do temporarily, but only a person who sits in that seat and just swims in that suffering with someone who's in that inner healing journey that's not necessarily safety, because developing a safety container to sit in that person's experience and hear about it and really help them help themselves, which is what, from my perspective, IFS is so powerful with, because you at your level, your base level, believe that they have everything within them to help heal, help restore, help rejuvenate them. And that's a genuine belief that I'm always holding at every single session, at every single conversation, to be honest. I don't take my quote unquote hat of that off, because that's a core belief that I hold. And know that as soon as they want to take a step forward, my compassionate part is there to help guide them what would be best for them based on their values. And so I think any individual that struggles knowing the lines between empathy, sympathy, and compassion, that's going to be really difficult to not get in the pool and just swim around with them and kind of drown each other, right? And I think that is how you do it, for lack of better words. You understand the difference between those lines. You understand your own parts that want to dive into the pool and just swim around with them and get activated because you hear what they're going through, and you get activated and your parts get activated. And so it is one of those most meaningful seats I believe anyone can have, be it a friend, be it a person that you meet in the grocery store, be it someone that you sit next to in the metro, be it even, an actual clinical setting. I think it is the most powerful opportunity that one human can get to another. And that power holds great responsibility. And that responsibility comes in knowing thyself through and through, knowing when those therapist parts
Oh,
might step in. So,
oh my
yeah.
God. Yes.
Yeah.
Such a beautiful analogy.
It's easy to get in the pool. It's really easy to get in the pool with
And
others and
they
swim
can
around.
literally pull you in. They
Yeah.
can pull you in.
Yep. Yeah.
Um, that brings us to the close of this wonderful, insightful conversation again, Emilia. This is such a pleasure as always.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for your time.
This was amazing, Shada. I love your questions. They're so thoughtful and conscientious, and you're genuinely curious, and I can feel it. And I adore that. I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much.